I just didn't see him. I don't know why, I just didn't. I was driving my pickup truck down a dirt road. It was very dark out, and specks of dust hung in the air like a thick cloud when my headlights shined on them. Country music blared over the radio. I wasn't really listening to it that much. I was driving back from the bar and was headed home to my family. Maybe I was drunk, maybe I wasn't, I don't know. All I know is that suddenly my peaceful trip ended when a kid, couldn't have been older than 5, connected with the front end of my truck and then skidded across the road. I sat in my truck, stunned. My mind couldn't quite process what had just happened at first. Then it slowly started to sink it. A horrid feeling of sickened remorse flew through me. My stomach hurt, and I felt nauseous. I jumped out of my truck and ran to the boy. He was clearly dead. He had on a shirt with blue stripes running across it and some black shorts. All of it was stained with blood. The poor kid's body had caved inwards, revealing a shattered rib cage and a few glimpses of his insides. And the look of shocked agony was still held on the boy's face. I could only stand there, staring down at this boy, who but a moment ago had just been playing like any other kids his age. And now his life had been cut short, never to progress beyond that stage of innocent playfulness. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity of misery before getting back in my truck and driving home. It's funny how an event like that could cloud your experience. The rest of that night proceeded just like all my nights other go. I got home, my wife, Donna, greeted me, I hung out with my daughter, Mackenzie, for a little bit, and I did some housework. In fact, it seemed wrong that everything should be so normal. I felt like something should be different, but it was all the same as usual. The boy's death colored my experience in a dark way. I felt disgusting. Like some horridly deformed animal that didn't even deserve attention or happiness. I was a child murderer. I wanted to die. That was all I desired. I spent that night waiting for the police to arrive, even though I knew they probably wouldn't. There was, after all, no reason to suspect I had done anything. That night I dreamt of the accident over and over again. I would hit the child with my truck, watch him get projected into the other direction, and then it would repeat. All the while I felt mounting horror and guilt at what I was. But the last hit was different. As I watched for the 2,000th time, the child skidded across the rough asphalt road. Blood streaking the ground. But then, he moved. It was very subtle. A slight move of his shoulder, but he definitely moved. No doubt about it. After that I fell into deeper sleep without a single more dream. The next day I saw the child on the news. Or rather, pictures of him as he had once been. His name was Lenny Drover. A happy and vibrant kid. A member of his school's Little League baseball team. I saw a video of his mother and father crying. They tried to interview her, but you couldn't understand her though the sobs. The father had said that all he wanted now was for his son to be with God and for whoever did this to pay. I almost agreed with him. I looked around at all that I had and realized I didn't deserve any of it. Due to my negligence, that boy was dead, and I was going to get away with it, which almost made me feel worse. My daughter was in the room with me. She wasn't paying attention to the news. She was just playing with her dolls on the floor. I stared at her for a few moments with a sense of emptiness within me. Then I heard footsteps coming from down the hallway. I turned to see who it was, but no one was there. I turned back around and continued watching the news. A few minutes passed, and then I heard it again. Footsteps. I looked back, but again, no one was there. I looked to my daughter, but she didn't seem to notice it. I got up and walked down the hallway. Nothing seemed out of place. I gazed, in the dim light, at my family pictures and at the little table we had up against a wall. That was when I noticed that the potted plant we had was knocked over, spilling its contents onto the ground. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I said. I went and got the broom and the dustpan, and I cleaned up the little mess. But I felt a lingering sense of dread within me. Try as I might, I couldn't explain the footsteps. That being said though, I still viewed it as being too minor to really share with anybody. A week went by, with no other strange occurrences. Over the course of that week I had done some serious soul searching. I had begun the healing process of thinking that perhaps I wasn't really a bad person. Just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course, it had only been a week, I hadn't really gotten over it, but the deep, profound self-hatred and remorse had subsided slightly. That was until I was walking past that hallway in my living room when I noticed out of the corner of my eye that something was wrong. Or, to be honest, it wasn't that I saw something, it's more like I felt something. I could see a shadow coming out of the hall bathroom. It didn't really resemble anything, it was just something blocking the light. I told myself, rationally, that my wife had probably just moved a box in there or something. But it was more than just a shadow. It was the feeling that it brought with it. The feeling that it saw me. But not just visually. I felt like it was looking at me, and then through me, sifting through the dark recesses of my mind to find that one event which cast a darkness on my psyche. I wanted to run, but I couldn't because I felt it beckon me. And then my wife slammed the front door. It jolted me awake from my state and I looked away from the hall. Then I looked back, and the shadow was gone. "Honey. I was just at the store, I bought those razors you said you needed," said my wife. "Okay, thank you," I stuttered out. I tried to push the memory of that shadow from my mind, but I just couldn't. I must be crazy. I must be. The deranged hallucinations of a guilt-ridden paranoid madman. That must have been what that was. Unless. I couldn't sleep that night. Every single noise I heard, I treated with suspicion. From the air conditioning, to the ice in my refrigerator, to the beeps of the washer. I maybe got like 2 hours of sleep. The next day passed, and then the next, and then the next. The guilt had returned in full force. My wife had asked me repeatedly if something was wrong, and I would always just make up some bullshit story. But deep down, I felt like I shouldn't even exist. I was watching the news again one day, and they were once again talking about the boy. I watched intently on what was going on and almost began crying. Then they flashed an image of the boy, smiling on the screen. Then something weird happened. The birds stopped chirping outside, and the car that was driving outside my window stopped. Then, the image of the boy's smiling face began to slowly turn to a frown. My vision in my periphery turned dark, and I was stuck with tunnel vision on the boy with no way to look away. The boy's frown then turned to a look of sadness, and then one of agony, as the boy's face started to rot away. He started screaming. It was louder than anything I had ever heard in my life. It started at a normal volume, and then increased in magnitude with each passing moment. His skin turned purple, then black as it started to peel away, revealing his facial muscles. Blood had started pouring from the horrible remains of his face. And then, it just stopped. Things immediately went back to normal. The birds started chirping again and the cars started moving. By now the TV had moved on to something else. But I could never move on. I broke down into tears. Now my wife was incredibly concerned for me, but I dared not tell her what was bothering me. I wouldn't be able to stand the look of horror on her face as I told her what I had done. I had replayed that thought in my head of me telling her how I ran over a child, and it never gave me a pleasant feeling. I would simply wake up, go to work, not talk to anyone while I was there, and then return home. While at home I would hardly speak. I would just watch TV or just hide in my room. I would keep all of the lights off and just stare up at the ceiling fan. When my wife would come in to check on me, I would just tell her to leave me alone. She was always a very agreeable woman and always tried to shy away from confrontation, so she gave me my space. Someday I would tell her, I told myself, but not today. Today I will simply wallow in my own misery and self-hatred and hope that this anguish would just go away. Some time had passed when I realized that enough was enough. I couldn't keep on like this. So, I decided to take my daughter to the park. I felt like it would be nice to go get some fresh air. She was very excited about the arrangement as well, she was practically jumping up and down with excitement. I think it also might have been because the two of us hadn't had proper bonding time in quite a while on account of my miserable state. So, we hopped in the truck and went off to the park. The park was a great woodland that had been set aside by the city for recreational use. There was a fun area for kids, a river for fishing, and a field that kids played sports in. My daughter ran around inside of the fun area with a bunch of other kids, going on the slide, swinging, and all around just enjoying themselves. Much like the boy had been. I sat on a bench, just trying to relax. There were a few other parents around me, and I spoke to one of them for a few minutes. I was enjoying myself until I heard a group of parents talking about the boy. They say you couldn't even recognize him. It's been so long and they haven't been able to find who did it. I say it's a failure of the police. They ought to be doing more to catch that bastard, said one of them. I know, right? They deserve to pay for what they did, said another one. I tried to blot them out, but I couldn't. I looked away from where they were standing and covered my ears. I managed to block out all of the noise. After a few seconds I took my hands off of my ears. But there was still no noise. But the feeling from the shadow had returned. Like something could see into me. I looked out across the fun area, and standing behind the swings was the boy. He was looking right at me. I stood up from the bench and looked right at him. Then, from behind a slide, the same boy appeared, and then another one appeared from next to the jungle gym. And then more, then more, then more. I called for my daughter and she ran towards me. She was confused and upset that we had to leave. She kept on begging me to let her stay. Shut the fuck up right now, I said to her. She looked at me with astonishment and then started to quietly sob. The other parents were looking at us now. And the boys were too. In fact, they were laughing at me. I ran to my car with my daughter close behind, and we went right home. My wife tried to talk to me, but I just ignored her. I ran to my room, shut the door, and tucked my head under the covers like a scared child. I stayed like that for a long time. Eventually, I told my wife she could come in, and she tried to comfort me. But nothing she said helped. I couldn't tell any more what was going on. I felt like an astronaut that was lost in space, completely isolated from the world. I didn't know what was real anymore. I thought that I was losing my mind. That the guilt and paranoia had rotten my mind and infected my soul. A just punishment for a child killer, I told myself. But then perhaps I wasn't crazy. Perhaps the spirit of that young boy was terrorizing me for the wrong I had committed against him. Or perhaps something darker. And that was when the feeling from the shadow returned. A feeling that someone was walking through my mind, reading me like a book. But also, the feeling that I was being summoned. Half by choice and half by command, I got up from my bed and followed the sense. It led me to that hallway. I looked out and I saw it again. The shadow in the door. The feeling became more potent, and as I approached, it grew in intensity. I came closer and closer to the light of the bathroom and the darkness of the shadow. I came to within a foot of the door. Then, I entered the room. Standing before me was what I can only describe as an emptiness. It would be a mistake to say that it appeared black or like any color at all. It was simply a location where there was just nothing. A void. A cold, empty void. All of the walls were covered in blood, and I knew whose blood they belonged to. In more places than I can count, the word guilty had been drawn with the blood of that dead boy. On the bathroom floor, pieces of his dead body were scattered about. An arm here, a leg there, and an extraordinary number of other parts. I nearly vomited from the stench. My attention was soon stuck on the void though. It captured my gaze and I was unable to look away from it. The feeling of dread and anguish was unbearable at this point. Then, it spoke. "You know what you must do," it said. But it said it in the voice of the boy. "I know," I said. And just like that, my bathroom was spotless. The emptiness had gone, as did the body parts and the blood. And just like that, something had left me as well. The sadness was gone. As was the guilt and the feeling of dread. In fact, I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. But I knew what I had to do. So, I am going to commit suicide. I have my revolver in hand, with one bullet. There is nothing in this world left for me. I don't know if I am motivated by the ghost of that kid, the command of a demon, or the motivations of madness, but it doesn't really matter to me at this point. What's the difference anyways between ghosts of the dead and the ghosts of the mind after all? A fitting end for a child murderer. Something tells me that boy is smiling right now.